All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this delayed public safety meeting here, starting an hour later than normal. I'm glad you could all make it today, and we will kick the meeting off here. Actually, first, just want to welcome our newest member, Benjamin Malloy. So welcome, Benjamin. Thank you for your willingness to serve. And yeah, we're going to kick it off with the first item on the agenda, which is the Public Health and Safety Report and our next steps. And I'll turn it over to Mark, Kate, who's gonna tee this up for me today?
Thank you, Commissioner. Ms. Behrens is going to lead the report off. And I believe, first of all, again, I too want to apologize for the confusion of the meeting time. It was intended because of the long morning that we knew we would have with the budget and housing discussion in executive session to start at 1:30, and so we'll have to find out why there was discrepancy in the posting. But Ms. Behrens will give us an update of the report that was publicly posted. So the materials that she's going to cover today has not only been sent to Public Safety Committee, but the members of the public should have access to them as well.
Thank you. So I know time is limited and you are being asked to engage in the culmination of about 4 months worth of work. So I will try to keep my overview at a high level, and then I'm here as well as a whole host of our staff who have been working on this effort are here to answer your questions and take your feedback and direction. So first, just as I mentioned, the Public Safety Committee was asked back in December by the full City Commission to delve a little bit deeper into questions that were raised about whether the city had all of the tools necessary to respond to some concerns that were raised, particularly around disorderly conduct and public health issues in our downtown areas. So over that period of time, we've been engaging with this committee on a number of fronts. We presented information about the tools the city did have, ordinances and resources and practices that we had to address those issues, including public health and safety response tools. We also presented information about systems change and systems improvement from some of our partners in the realm of homelessness response and housing response. Again, not to conflate necessarily issues of criminality with homelessness and housing instability, but recognize there is some overlap, that we could expect to see fewer people who engage in the kind of law enforcement world if their needs in other places are better met, allowing them to stay out of crisis kind of situations. Before I delve into kind of the overview of the summary of the report, I did want to step back. This report tends to focus on sort of the negative behaviors, the behaviors that are being complained about, and gaps that exist in our resources in order to fully address all of those things. I did want to take a step back and put that into the context of Grand Rapids. There are a lot of positive things happening in the city of Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids is the second biggest city in Michigan. Our economy has really come out faster and stronger than many other areas out of the pandemic. We see a lot of growth, not only in the city as a whole. If you were able to see the manager's preliminary budget presentation earlier this morning, you saw some of that. Income tax continues to rebound and outpace where we were pre-pandemic, but other within the downtown as well. So the downtown continues to be a growing area for us, particularly with respect to housing. There are more than, according to DGRI, more than 1,500 new housing units in the pipeline for downtown, something that I think will be very positive for the community. We see events back at pre-pandemic levels, event attendance of over 1 million people in the last calendar year. We see, and that has some good impacts on our food and beverage industry, the hotel industry, and many of those things that make Grand Rapids really a vibrant community with a lot of opportunities for all. You also see a lot of commitment, not only within City Hall, but outside with all of our philanthropic partners and nonprofit and non-governmental organizations, with a true commitment to make sure that those opportunities are really available to everybody in our community, including those that have been historically marginalized. So I did want to highlight that. But this is a community that says, you know, we don't want to just accept some of the negative things that we see as just a part of being a big city, part and parcel of being a big city. We think that we can do better as a community, and that's really where this effort came out of. So we had, as now is in front of you, this conversation with our public. So the City Commission, and I'll just follow along with the memo here. The City Commission originally received in December some concerns, as I said, about health and safety conditions and disruptive behavior in the downtown. We hosted, and the Public Safety Committee helped us advertise for some broader community engagement around questions of public health and safety. Those, again, were broad conversations. We had two open to the general public, facilitated by the National Civic League. They asked a number of questions that were part of a facilitated conversation where people got around a table and spoke with each other about what health and safety issues, what things that tend to contribute to safety, feelings of safety, and things that tend to detract, and solutions that this community could think through together. And there were really some great conversations. The themes are digested here in the first part of the memo. I'll just hit a couple highlights. Again, there's difference of opinion amongst folks who attended these engagement sessions, as you are probably not surprised to hear. But a lot of commonality around the things that tend to make people feel safe is to be in a place that welcomes them, a place where they see people that they know or that really create a sense of belonging. So that's something that was quite universal. There was also some universal feeling about, again, public defecation, trespassing, some of those things tend to detract from feelings of safety. There was, more of a split opinion on kinds of the visibility of law enforcement or private security, some finding that that really does help lend a feeling of safety, and others feeling that that wouldn't be the first tool that they would go to in the toolbox. We also did some focus groups as part of this engagement, smaller focus group, again with business owners, particularly in the downtown community, and they echoed a lot of the themes that came out of the original communication in December, as well as youth-focused engagement, and especially youth experiencing homelessness. And we got some really good insight for that unique population and their needs in the system, which is not only helpful for the Public Safety Committee here, but we did also pass that along to our partners in the continuum of care. So the remainder of this memo talks about then, with that context of public safety and sort of what is the benchmark we're trying to reach for our citizens in terms of what looks like a robust and solid public safety response, something that helps people feel like they are safe moving about in our community when and where they need to. We match that up with the resources that we have available to us and what we are doing now to meet those expectations. So this memo talks quite a bit about information and tools and resources that the city has available and that we have been persistently and consistently applying to some of these issues. And I'll just flag a couple of those things for you. So we continued, and you'll hear a lot if you read through all of the comments that we receive from the public about health and safety, about our homelessness outreach team, or HOT. So over the course of, since the pandemic, HOT has been out there, boots on the ground, interacting with folks that are living unhoused or elsewhere in our community in crisis. It's a co-response sort of model to meet people where they're at and understand what resources they need. So we continued our efforts with HOT, doing that outreach in the community. And since the time the Public Safety Committee began this conversation, in fact, the city moved one step more towards HOT being a permanent service. So it was started as a pandemic response. Given the needs in the community over the course of the last several months, the commission did approve additional positions in the fire department to maintain that service. And you'll see some statistics there about the kinds of outreach and work that HOT is able to do, including jail and emergency department diversions, and just really a volume of outreach contacts. And in each of those outreach circumstances, they are able to understand what the folks they're interacting with may need in terms of support for finding and maintaining housing and housing stability. So you'll see some of the statistics there. In addition, the city really has focused over the last several months in improving some of our protocols around the public health side of things, so cleanliness, and that's both in response to public defecation, but also buildup of items in the right-of-way, abandoned or otherwise, that are contributing to lack of public health or concern about public health conditions. So I provide more detail in writing in the memo, but suffice to say we have increased our level of service in some of these areas here on the screen now to a daily cleaning. We coordinate that with HOT where needed to make sure that we are able to come along and clean up those rights of way on a daily basis. That daily cleaning also occurs in a number of our downtown parking ramps, as well as our downtown parks. So and the daily cleaning in parks commence kind of in the spring. So we've been able to make sure that level of service occurs. We've also, over the last several months, done some process improvements just to make sure we are coordinating across the various work groups that are involved in that we have HOT and the cleaning happening more closely in time so that we're able to make sure we're addressing the circumstances that are on the ground and supporting folks that may need to move to facilitate that cleaning and helping them understand where to go or where they can have more permanent storage of belongings that may be impacted by that cleaning. We've also done some work to make enforcement of some of these misdemeanor ordinances that do already exist at the city easier. So again, misdemeanor ordinances are something that are enforced by calling the police, call 911 if you have experienced that, and they will be responded to in the priority order that is being dealt with at the time by the police department. Recognizing that trespass and some of these other crimes can be very transitory, very difficult for the police to come across that situation in action. We have also worked with property owners in the city attorney's office to allow for some camera-based, so camera evidence, video evidence-based enforcement of some of those crimes, and are working now with business owners to understand how to take advantage of that process improvement. In addition, we have brought some additional resources to bear, again, on that sort of having folks feel comfortable being out and about downtown, including increasing private security. So we have partnered with other organizations to have a private security presence on Monroe Center and the Skywalk and other parts of downtown. We also have security in our parks that will cover not only the downtown parks that will cover the downtown parks that you see there on the screen now, including overnight. So with that, I will turn to some of the systems improvement work. So what we heard also through the public engagement and what this committee heard a little bit about in the early months of the year was that there are folks in our community that are still not well served by some of the systems that exist to help those either who are experiencing housing instability or who have persistent medical or other mental health needs, and that they may be in situations to be out in crisis in the public arena because those systems still have gaps that folks are falling through. And so we did talk to this committee before, and I just summarized here in the memo and reattached the presentations that were provided back in February about kind of two key partners and work that they are doing. So this is not by any means an exhaustive list of systems improvement work that is happening, but seemed the most closely aligned with what was going to help address some of the circumstances that were being brought to the Commission's attention. So we had a presentation presentation by Courtney Myers-Keaton, the Executive Director of our Continuum of Care, that was talking about the strategic plan for that body, which is a coalition of a lot of service providers that are particularly focused on homelessness response, and they coordinate both applications for federal funding to support those efforts, and also our coordinated entry system that matches people based on need with the units, the housing units that are available. So there's a number of work items that the Continuum of Care is working on over the next year. I will highlight the street outreach alignment effort. I think in our experience in all of the public communication we've received over the last several months, and probably going back further than that, a lot of pointing out that there's a need to align street outreach efforts. So making sure that folks who are living unhoused or need to be able to access the system have clear support, have consistent support, know and are building a relationship with the outreach entities that are helping connect them up to those services, and that they are getting consistent support to get the documentation they need to take advantage of the systems that do exist to support, as well as for folks who see someone in need, knowing who to call and who is actually going to respond to that situation. So we heard a lot about that, and there is alignment work underway through the COC across the organizations that provide that sort of street outreach to ensure that their focus is aligned, that they are sharing information efficiently in a way that quickly gets folks who need it into housing that exists. We also talked a little bit with Eureka People, Executive Director of Housing Kent, about the bigger housing ecosystem. So there are obviously units that are needed for homelessness response and rapid rehousing, getting people quickly back into housing. The whole housing market has shortages across all affordability levels, and Housing Kent provided information again about the work that they are doing as a backbone organization for a whole host of providers that either develop housing, develop subsidized housing, provide housing stability services, provide homelessness response, and you heard a lot from Eureka about what a backbone organization does and the work that they are committed to doing over the next 4 quarters that should help fill one of the big gaps that we heard consistently was just a systems map. Who's doing what, who's funding what, who's serving which populations. And if we could see that mapped out, it would help the system identify places where there is a need for efficiency and make sure we're rowing all in the same direction. One thing that I do want to flag as other systems improvement work that we did not delve into in prior presentations, and certainly could bring more information back if needed, but again, as some of our public communications pointed out, there really is a need for better and more mental health services and mental health crisis services. So we did flag, one major milestone later this year will be the opening of the new Behavioral Health Crisis Center, which is anticipated to help increase the speed at which people can access mental health support, especially during periods of crisis. So with all of that, really the next part of the memo, and I'll just leave it up on the screen, with the experiences that we had as city staff responding to some of these circumstances and the conversations with our partners in looking at the public feedback we received at the engagement sessions and in writing and in emails, we try to map those things and figure out where do we really have sort of the biggest gaps, and what can we do about those. So this part of the memo and I did touch a little bit on it already, we have recognized some gaps, and we are already taking some steps operationally to fill those gaps, or with our partners in the way we participate in some of their efforts to fill those gaps. So I'll flag a couple. Trespass, we've already talked about that. That is something that we persistently hear is difficult for some business owners and some property owners to ensure that we are removing as much friction, if you will, in that process to make it easy for folks that are facing persistent trespass and malicious mischief, we used to call it, and property damage. So we're trying to make that an easier thing to enforce using video evidence, et cetera. We did recognize early in this kind of redoubled effort on cleanliness and public health issues that we did have some gaps in coordination and communication just across our departments, and also with property ownership issues. So if there's a public health issue in a particular area, who owns that area? Whose responsibility is it to clean that up? So we're making some improvements there, trying to be very much at the 311 sort of level, a one-stop, let us know what situation needs to be addressed, and we'll work on the back end to figure out whose property it is, as opposed to, oh, I'm sorry, you need to contact so-and-so for that. So we're trying to make that a little bit more streamlined for the public. We also have noticed that more public, and did get feedback that more publicly available restrooms without needing to be a customer of a business would be helpful. So there are more public restrooms coming online. DGRI is installing one near Van Andel as part of a alley improvement project that they're doing there. Will be one of the Portland loos, similar to what already exists downtown. Our parks projects that are nearly done at Hartside Park or will be done soonish at Veterans Park will include more publicly accessible restrooms during the hours that the parks are open. And so that may address some of the gaps we're seeing now. We'll continue to monitor that situation. One area we really did dive in on in terms of gaps over the last couple of months was with respect to the Skywalk. So that's a unique issue with respect to policing and enforcement. It's a right-of-way. It's not a public right-of-way. It's an easement over private property. There are a number of entities that coordinate that and coordinate security about that. So we continue to have conversations with all of those involved parties to improve, again, the seamlessness of response to any circumstances there, criminal behavior or unwanted behavior. We've also had our CEPTED expert do a walkthrough there and develop a list of recommendations that we're working through with property owners and expect to see some improvements there. I've already talked quite a bit about street outreach, so I won't belabor that point much longer, but suffice it to say, both the city and the county leaning in more with our nonprofit partners that have been providing that service to both recognize that we are staffed through HOT and our Network 180 partners 6 days a week and should be aligned with what are those outreach messages, and we have a resource there that we need to make sure we are leveraging as much as possible to make sure people are getting the assessments they need to get linked up with the right kind of permanent housing. Also continued work to be done there about how to encourage folks to take advantage of other temporary housing until permanent housing is available. So whether it's using shelters or finding other kinds of, this is not a term of art, but bridge housing that folks will be able to access that will be safer than living unhoused is something that we'll continue to work on with all of those partners. I think the last set of gaps and overlaps that I will address here are twofold. So one is kind of a lack of transparency. So what became clear to us as we presented information to you about systems improvement work, particularly where it isn't necessarily led by the city, is that there's a lack of information out there for the public about what work is already underway. So many of the comments that we received during the public engagement sessions were sort of, somebody should be doing this. And there is a lot of somebody's doing some of that work. And what we realize is we need to better educate folks about that. We need to make what is expected out of that work and the pace and the deliverables of that work more transparent to folks so that there's more accountability and it is better understood how folks that are interested can participate in that. So that's one of the gaps that we will be filling through periodic reports to this body, but also finding ways with our partners to talk more about what they are doing and amplify and get that word out. The other gap I would say is an expectations gap. So I'll just highlight one thing here on that front. So I talked about public health and cleanliness, and work that the city was doing within our facilities or in the rights of way to clean. So we do that once a day in the areas that I highlighted for you. We do it usually in the morning. We're not staffed, nor do we have the responsibility to come in between those 24-hour cleanings to respond to something that might happen during the day. We'll take the complaint in. If we can get staff there, we'll address it. But that's just a level of service expectation gap that we need to be clear with people about what we are able to do and how quickly they should expect to see us out there addressing some of these public health and cleanliness issues. Of course, we should be held accountable to doing it once a day. If we say we're doing it once a day, we should be held accountable to that. But more often than that is going to be more of a challenge for us. So there are some of those gaps that exist that we, again, need to make sure we are clear about what we're doing. We're quarterly reporting to this body about how that is going and what we're able to address through the persistent use of those efforts. But that will also hopefully help people understand what to expect and where we're dropping the ball versus where the service we're able to provide is maybe not as robust as folks would like it to be. And right now we hear a lot of this, we're dropping the ball. And maybe we're doing what we're staffed up to do, and it's just not the level of service that some folks would like us to be able to provide, which is a different conversation about resources. So those are the gaps that we really identified and are focusing on at the operational and staffing level. And with that, I would close. I've got a number of our department directors here who can answer more detailed questions about what we've been doing and learning over the last several months, or other questions that you may have about the information in this report, or what you have gleaned as necessary in addition to some of these gap-filling techniques going forward.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Behrens. With that, I'll turn to the city manager. Anything you want to add, or are we good to open the floor up here, sir?
Thank you, Ms. Behrens. No, we're looking for some feedback from this body on how to respond to identified gaps, and so I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion.
Very good. All right, I guess I'll begin by opening it up to my colleagues and the members of this board to, if there's any follow-up questions you'd like to start with for Ms. Behrens or any of the city staff or community partners that are in the room related to this issue and any of the information we received. Yeah, please. Turn to our mayor.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Behrens. So I have a couple questions. I'll start with some concrete questions. So in reference to our added cleaning, do we have any ability, and I know we just had the budget presentation this morning, and I don't have it in front of me about the potential to enhance and increase cleaning, but I'm curious if we are able to look at adding the weekends to that. I know a lot of the complaints that we get are on the weekends, especially when we have more foot traffic. And I think it's great that we're doing it Monday through Friday, but it leaves a couple days where we're not able to cover that. So I guess that's my first question. Do you want me to just throw them all out there? Yeah? Or do you
Yeah.
want to answer them one by one?
I can make sure the people who can answer those questions start lining up here, so.
So, and just for clarification, there's different cleaning. So we're talking about street, parks, parking garages. So which one are you referring to, Mayor? All or one in particular?
Well, actually, I'm curious about all. I mean, the complaints that we're getting
Okay.
are not just in certain corridors. I mean, we're getting complaints about stairways in our parking ramps, in our publicly owned parking ramps. So I am curious, what is the plan for cleanliness in those different spaces, and can we enhance that? And that goes to the second question. Great that people can call us during the day to report something, but do we have a plan to try to identify someone that someone can call 7 days a week, that if it's not if it's a nuisance complaint and not a 911 complaint, because that's part of the issue too, is Friday night, something comes up, we don't have anybody coming back until Monday, and then there continues to be this issue over the weekend with no city response.
So let's see if we can break it down. And talk specifically around street cleaning first, park maintenance second, then parking ramps third. And what's the protocol? And please don't take the stroll from the back. If your department's there, just come to the front.
Well,
Please. Mayor?
You want me to start there?
Nope. Let's just do one at a time.
Well, and, and that goes to street outreach. And I know we recently had a conversation about this and how there's a lot of, quite frankly, just people are not informed what they do, how they do it. Is it rapid rehousing? Is it just well checks? And then who do people call? Again,
Okay.
we're getting the calls, but none of us around this table have oversight, accountability, or direct connection to anyone that's actually doing street outreach. And with so many agencies doing it, and in my opinion, somewhat of a disconnect of alignment, it makes it very difficult to know who to call when.
Let's begin with city services first on cleaning, and then I want to move to more of the supportive and rehousing services on who to call after hours, in addition to city staff. I think we're talking about community partners, so in addition to HOT. But let's start with the routine public services in the order that I asked.
All right. Good afternoon, City Manager, Mayor, Commissioners. I'm John Gorney. I'm your Public Works Director. My department is responsible for the street cleaning, so the corridors that have been identified that we are cleaning Monday through Friday. We put together a standard protocol in our SOP that does allow for after hours or emergency cleanups if necessary. So we're not staffing Monday or Saturday and Sunday, but we are available for emergency calls if needed.
Good afternoon, David Markwart, Parks Director. We do have weekend staff in to help with park cleaning and operations. That staff comes on board here at the end of this month. Those are seasonal staff, people that help us out on the weekends. And so we should be seeing them in our park spaces, particularly downtown, in the next week or two.
Okay.
So currently, to the mayor's point, if there's the need to clean the park on a weekend, is there a scheduled maintenance that occurs on Saturday or Sunday, or
Yep.
which days?
Yep. Currently, City Manager, we do have staff in, full-time staff on the weekends. It is one or two individuals, and they're covering the entire system. And their focus first is opening up venues and shelters for rentals for residents, and then secondly, priority areas that need attention.
So just for clarification, so on weekends for cleaning of our 70 parks, you have how many staff members available?
Two staff.
2 staff. Okay, so it goes back to the expectation. So we'll come back to that later. Then, in terms of parking facilities and parking structures.
We're 24/7, 365 all across the year, and so we always have staff that are available. So if you call 311 during the day, it goes to 311. At 4:30 every day, it turns over and goes directly to our dispatch center, where we have cameras that are maintaining everything. And we just recently made a change, so the big gap had been first shift. We didn't have first shift on Saturday. We now have first shift on Saturday that's available for all of these resources, and then third shift comes in Sunday night. So there is no gap in services for us and what we're trying to do for the approach to the garages. One area of concern is we have a lot of mixed-use developments, and there's area that is not the city's property. It's actually private property as part of the condo agreements. So one in which was of concern recently, Mayor Bliss, that was actually the private property owner's responsibility. So we had to work with them to accelerate an after-hours cleanup for them to come out and do that. And we're trying to work with them on a better communication strategy for how all of the properties maintain to the same level of service in all of those mixed-use developments.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? So I just recently learned that we have the surveillance in most of our parking ramps, and there is a direct viewing at 911. I'm assuming that's reactive and not proactive. So we're not able to see an issue. All of us have heard complaints about people being approached in parking ramps, feeling like they're being followed to their car, asked for money. When they say no, they feel harassed. We're not able to see when there's maybe people gathering and and hanging out in our parking ramps and be able to respond to that? Is it just reactive, or how does that work?
So
And
we don't
can
have a
be
proactive.
Sorry.
We don't have cameras in every nook and cranny of every garage. It's cost prohibitive and it's impossible to do that. So we've been trying to be as strategic about where they're located for safety and security, like stairwells, blind corners, entrances and exits to all of the facilities to be able to know who's coming in and where they're, going. All of that camera stuff is set up so that PD has access to them at any time, but it is more in a reactive nature because we have one person, sometimes two people, depending on when there's a busy special event. We can't dedicate all that time because we're also trying to monitor all of the people that are coming in and out for any of the special events. So it depends on time of day. Like during the regular in the week, during our peak periods, we do have people that are able to monitor those cameras more regularly, and we have a really good relationship with GRPD. If it's something that we can take care of ourselves, that's just getting somebody out of there and cleaning up messes, versus someone that's doing criminal behavior or activity, we can work with GRPD to get those issues addressed.
So let me just follow up, more plain language. So if we have hundreds of cameras in our ramps, we have one person that's responsible at any time of the shift to monitor all of that footage, all that screening. Is this the same person when you press the button at the gate that answers to let you in and out?
Yes.
Okay. So this is not real-time crime surveillance. This is more kind of preventive, like your home security. If something happens, you have the ability, if you know about it, you can focus on it or you can follow up. But there's not, if there's 200 cameras, there's not 20 people watching the cameras all the time.
No.
All right. And the access that the police department receives is to what part of the police department, if we're not intruding too much on operations, Chief?
For the record, Eric Winstrom. We have access both in our watch commander's office and in the 911 center to go in, but again, it would be reactive. We don't have that many screens.
But if there were violent crime activity that we knew was occurring on a frequent basis, serious crimes, we would surveil that. But for
Yes.
people who are pooping and peeing, this would not rise to the level of active surveillance.
Generally speaking, that is correct, yes, sir.
Right.
So then, Mayor, you asked some questions about wellness checks and street outreach. So just with
Can I hop in on a follow-up, I guess, while we're talking parking? I mean, so good to know 24-hour, 365, 7-day-a-week coverage with somebody from Parking Services available. Are those folks spending a majority of their time just in the car checking, or are we actively monitoring stairwells and, as you referenced, lots of blind spots in parking garages? Are we on foot, making sure those things are clear and safe?
So one element is just the person who's in dispatch that's managing the phones and looking at the cameras and can react to that.
Right.
In addition to that, we actually have parking operations associates, formerly known as security, that drive around to all the facilities. And their role is they drive through them and they also go through all the stairs. Okay. Now, the goal is we try to reach them about 8 to 10 times a day, each stairwell in each facility. If it's a busy special event night, that's not going to happen. Or if they're taken away on calls to other calls for service in some of our other facilities, they will not reach every facility to that, but that's the target that we've set for ourselves.
Okay.
So that's both on foot and in car to be able to drive through all the facilities to monitor for all types of behavior.
Again, I think there's good information. It's things that I think people ask, and because it is the perception of safety matters just as much as the actual safety of the environment. And so knowing that there are people doing that is, I don't think people recognize or realize that there is that level of physical monitoring of the spaces by individuals, not just riding around in a car, but on foot.
So Mayor, then to your second point, while there is active cleaning and then perhaps even opportunities to improve it, cleaning alone will not address this issue. That's a symptom of the bigger problem. And so I think your earlier question of who do people call when they're chronically unhoused people to make sure they have the needed resources to get supportive services and housing, to me, is a very important question that merits the same level of attention that we just gave to maintenance of city facilities. And so we have partners in this room that represent city service from the HOT team. I see our partners from Network 180 and the COC that are here, and I would offer them the same opportunity to address this body that city staff has had.
Yes, so Mayor, you would ask particularly about the street outreach. I just wanted to open with a wellness or welfare check. People may always call 911 if they're concerned they see someone that looks like they maybe need a wellness check, welfare check. You can always call 911 for that. But I do have Courtney Myers-Keaton here to talk a little bit about street outreach and who to call. We can always follow up with more detail from the individual outreach providers as well if we need to.
Thank you all. Hi, I'm Courtney Myers-Keaton, and I'm the director at the COC, otherwise known as the Coalition to End Homelessness. So I think there might be three particular populations that we're talking about who should they call. I hear maybe City of Grand Rapids employees when they receive complaints from businesses or perhaps even just concerns from residents in the neighborhood, general community members, and then individuals themselves who are experiencing homelessness. And so I think that we can address all three of those. Individuals who are experiencing homelessness are generally going to call 211 first and then be connected to services. Now, I do think that some of the discussions that we've had recently are that there needs to be better awareness around when people are experiencing homelessness, what is the process for them to be connected to resources? And part of that is that our street outreach teams do go out there and they connect with those individuals. They have cards for them to make sure that they can stay in consistent communication. But it is a matter of, do they know who they should be contacting? And so there could be increased awareness around that as well. As far as City of Grand Rapids employees, I think that there's an opportunity here for us, and I've discussed this actually with our Deputy City Manager, Kate Behrens, is that we are in the process of developing some workflows with some other municipalities that seems to be working with them around their employees when they receive complaints on who are they connecting them with. And so I think that we can standardize that process for the City of Grand Rapids as well. We do already have a process in place with code compliance. So when there is an encampment area that needs to be addressed, that we want to make sure that we've had all of our street outreach that can connect with them. What happens is there is a notification that immediately goes out to the COC, and then we send that out to our work group. And then that work group coordinates amongst themselves to determine who's going out to that encampment when, to ensure that all of those individuals have an HMIS entry. That's our homeless management information system for the general public, that we have an assessment on file so they can be prioritized for resources, and that they have a general connection to the system. So that's the process specifically for encampments, though. So I do think that there is a process that can be developed for when city employees are receiving just outside communication not related to the code compliance process that we currently have. As far as the general public, we also recommend that the general public, that if they see somebody experiencing homelessness, that they can make a couple of decisions here. They can let that individual know that there's 211 as an option to connect with, or if we need to create another process in place, or if there's a concern about their general well-being, they should connect with 911 if there's a concern about their general well-being. I will say that there is an after-hours process as well for individuals who are experiencing homelessness. We do have our housing assessment program has an after-hours hotline. That hotline is only reached through 211 though. So 211 is called, and if somebody is experiencing a housing crisis in that moment and needs to talk to somebody, then they will be connected with the after-hours person. So that process is in place. There's ways that we can improve upon that we are open to discussing and looking for opportunity to discuss further.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, so if someone can pull up page 5, it's page 13 from the packet on what's happening, what can I do, those resources to call.
Oh boy, page 13.
Yep. Yep, that one. So if you just start at the top and scroll down, so I think what these resources are very clear about what to do in emergency. And some of the other calls, for example, urinating, that hotline, or the hot number to call, the 4240 or the DGRI number to call. I think what we need to verify what are the hours those numbers are being served. And the other point, I think the after-hour number, the 211 number for someone experiencing crisis, I don't see that one in this list of resources to call. I see 311, but not 211. So perhaps we can add that, and also see what other after-hour services are answered 24 hours besides 911. And I think the parking ramp, Mr. Naramore indicated, is answered 24 hours. But it does, I guess, the other concern in terms of who shows up is the bigger question. Not who calls, but who shows up. Because consistently, the only team that I know that shows up when I call is the hot team. And that's comprised of fire, police, Network 180. And so I guess that's the question that would help this discussion. Who shows up when people are experiencing crisis consistently upon being called? How does the delivery of service work? And how long does it take?
Yeah, I can answer that. So I think that it depends on the extent that we are discussing too. So keep in mind that a lot of our street outreach providers are working with particular subpopulations too. And we do have one that is considered our lead entity, that is Pine Rest Street Reach. And they are out there. Now, you may not necessarily see them, but they are out there. Oftentimes they're out there early mornings, at 7 a.m. when they know that people are going to be around the encampment, because people will oftentimes leave during the day and go elsewhere to hang out. And they are connecting with them, I would say, at the very least, on a weekly basis. And so if it's a matter of who's connecting with who, I think those are the discussions actually that we have in our outreach work group meetings, which right now are monthly, and we have discussed, should we maybe move them so that we have them on a bi-weekly basis or even on a weekly basis if we need to increase some of that coordination and alignment. But the focus is always to be a housing-focused outreach tactic. And so when our street outreach connects with an individual, they are connecting with them to identify what are their housing goals and needs, and are there other supportive services that can be offered so that they can reach those goals and needs, including vital document gathering, such as birth certificates, state ID, and then if they also have to verify their length of time homelessness, because they might be experiencing chronic homelessness or disability, they're helping them to work on that too. So that would be the role of all of our outreach providers. But I think what we're hearing is that we want a standardized workflow for everybody to be able to follow, to ensure that we are getting this information in our system and that every entity is following the same exact process.
Yes, and I would like to see someone consistently show up that is as reliable as the hot team and known to the community as in who to call. So if the answer is you call 211, then there should be some guarantee or some predictability that some response would happen in some reasonable time for someone showing up. And I don't sense that that's happening. And my sense is I get the call, the city gets a call in the morning, and if I don't send a hot team, we'll get the same call the afternoon. If I don't send them that day, we'll get the same call the following day. So how do we ensure that there's other responses besides the city's homeless outreach team, who I would much rather have firefighters work on fire rescue and suppression and police officers on critical response issues. But the reason why we did this initially is because of the lack of coordinated outreach efforts. So if there is, and I'm prepared, I think the police chief would rather have his officers back doing regular routine policing. I think firefighters would as well. So that is, I think, the question that we really need to get to in terms of responses. What entities are going to provide that service?
Well, I think, City Manager, thank you for that. I think one of the questions I continue to ask is, in looking at and in having, I think over the last several months, there's been a lot of conversations about the unhoused community in Grand Rapids. And I think, I can look around the room and I can probably ask every person in here, they probably have a number of people we know who are perpetually unhoused in whatever neighborhood area that we frequent and spend a lot of time. And so it always feels like it's a very reactive response to this. Like, you can call 211 and somebody might show up and deal with this. But like, there still hasn't been like this global ownership of identifying the 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 people who we know are chronically unhoused, who are seen in our downtowns, in our neighborhoods, at our off-ramps, and to say this entity has sort of ownership over this individual to ensure that they're getting access to the services and supports that they need to hopefully get them into transitional housing or off the street or on the proper medication. I still I fail to recognize that actually happens, and that there's actually someone I believe that people are talking to these people on a daily basis. I don't dispute that at all. I just feel like there's not an urgency around the ownership of this is my cohort of individuals that I as this one of the 41 entities that have been identified in that space that's going to make sure that they get the consistency that they need to be able to help them. And so that's one of the most frustrating things that I've experienced over the last. I don't have an answer to that question, and no one's been able to provide it for me. And I don't know that there's an agency that said we're the lead agency in making sure that happens.
Yeah, so I will say that within the COC outreach work group and even within the Built for Zero work, that we do have regular case conferencing meetings that take place on a weekly or biweekly basis. In those case conferencing meetings, they are literally walking through the individuals that are on the by name list and discussing who is working with this particular person, what are the needs that they still have, and what are our action steps coming away from this meeting so that we can ensure that we're connecting them with those either additional resources or that documentation gathering that's still needed. So that is part of what that work group is doing. That is a community-wide responsibility that we have a set goal, for example, with our outreach policies that 90% of people who are unsheltered, we can ensure are on the by name list. That is one of our goals. And we talk about how are we trying to reach that goal. And I hear what you're saying is like, is there just one entity that I can say is responsible for this? And I think that from our perspective within the continuum of care, as a coalition, it is a continuum of care that we rely on our partnership within the community. So the COC as a whole is responsible, but I would say that it's not that it's still a community-wide responsibility because it is the community that makes up the continuum of care.
Commissioner, I think you raise a good point, and I think that's been a frustration for a lot of people who've been actively working on this. Both, I see a lot of our private sector partners here, nonprofit sector partners and staff. And I know, Eureka, you're doing great work there at Housing Kent, and I know long-term we have a system that needs to work better, that we have a lot of gaps in the current system. We have a lot of resources going into the system and a lot of nonprofits working in this space, and we have some work to do long-term. I still go back to it doesn't address the current continued complaints that we have had around accumulation of materials and property, trespassing, some of the aggressive panhandling, people feeling unsafe, defecation, and a real desire by all of us to connect with people who are unsheltered and get them into safe housing. We've had a lot of people who are unsheltered who have been victims of crime, who have passed away, who the list goes on and on. We know it's not safe for the individuals to live unsheltered and in places where people shouldn't be living. And so, I'm thinking, it's an urgent issue. We're the ones getting inundated. We're the ones, that people are coming to try to solve this problem. And I go back to the pilot that we did in 2020 when we had a significant uptick in individuals who are unsheltered. And the city did a direct contract with a nonprofit organization that we then were able to set very clear expectations and outcomes. And so I'm to the point where I'm open to looking at that again and maybe starting it in a very targeted geographical area, get some good outcomes and see how we can expand that. But I think we, in addition to all the work city staff's doing and some of the systems work that's happening, I think we need to also probably take a look at other options.
Mr. Kettle?
I read this report, always complete and well-stated. However, there's one partner on here, as I read through this thing, that isn't on here, and that's Kent County. The county's got the purview over mental health. And, as I read this thing, as I read the report, there's a price tag to this eventually. And why the city should be footing the bill for the whole shamaba, I don't know. I really think, and the state as well. I've had a couple conversations with people in the governor's office recently about this, and something really much bigger has to be done. The city just don't have the resources to cover this whole thing. And cleaning up the mess is good, and we need to do that. But I think that most of these people that are on the streets down here are mentally ill, and they just really need help. So I'm willing to walk next door and yell at people and get them over here, but not my job. But
Well, you can do that. if you
I'm
want,
willing.
And
You
I
tell
can't
me.
tell you what to do.
You give me a note, Mayor, I'm on my
We're
way.
actually good partners. This crisis stabilization unit, I
Right.
think, is a good example of that.
Right, but they need to step it up.
In all fairness, we do have Bill Ward here from Network 180, which is the county mental health authority, and they have been partnering with us on the services. But that is a fee-for-service partnership, and not what you're asking is bringing more resources from the county to help with a local solution. And we do that through the COC, where we jointly allocate funding. And I think it's time to review whether or not the funding that we have been providing is providing the outcomes we expected, or, to your point earlier, needs to be redirected.
Commissioners.
So while we're talking about funding, it just seems to me that the Parks Department, the Parking Department, and Public Works Department, their hands are tied because they don't have enough staffing to kind of cover the needs that we need right now. The weekend staffing, the watching of the videos, and that kind of thing. And I guess my only comment is I would encourage you to open up your pocketbook a bit, because I know that the city has a decent fund balance, and provide the kind of staff that we need to take care of these problems. If I was going to rent a park on the weekend, I would think twice about it now, just knowing how bad they kind of get, and you have two people working on the weekends to clean up those parks. That's kind of disgusting. So that's all I wanted to say.
Others who have questions? Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we'll mark this date down, April 25th, 23. I agreed with Ed Kettle.
I'm writing that down.
You can use that in the future, Ed. No, I mean, I think I read this report, and there's a lot of stuff in here. Let's just acknowledge that. We're talking about generally how people feel. We're talking about maintenance of our different investments that we have. We're talking about lighting. We have covered the gamut. And so while I appreciate that, and thank you, Ms. Behrens, for leading this work, along with others, I kind of always like to think, what's in my circle of influence, what's in my circle of control, and what's in my circle of concern. And I think all of us up here are very concerned. None of us want to get emails over the weekend that people had a bad experience being in this city. None of us do. And so there are some things, while I agree on the county piece, we can't really control that. We can just try to influence that. And so I wanted to kind of go back to some of the pieces where Chief Winstrom, when we looked at some of the response times, you kind of did some of those additional patrols. And I think we've talked about it in some meetings. We're probably talking those that are, what did you call it, Ms. Behrens? Like malicious behavior, right? So
Malicious mischief.
I'm going to set aside the idea of homelessness encampments. And I think probably everybody watching or in this room, I feel like everybody can agree that these are different categories. I haven't heard anybody, sort of who's very ingrained in this try to generalize people. So one, I want to say thank you to the people that are here that are representing different groups. I appreciate that. So let's try to take it by that, where it's really those that are engaging in the malicious behavior. Because I think you have to sort of say, we can't solve everything, and it is very overwhelming right now. But if we think about some of those malicious behavior pieces where it's people, staying inside of a business or being outside or, just being really aggressive with individuals. How many people are we talking about? Kind of what is that cycle? Because I know nobody brought it up, but obviously we had some conversation in the past about like how do we use our different rules on the books, others who would like to see some different ordinance pieces. So let's just put it out there. What does that really represent in terms of individuals? And then because I feel like we need to focus on what is actually in our control and probably prioritize that. So, and I think that this does that, but I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about that. So, Chief, is that, you're like, which Chief? Both of you guys, thanks.
Good afternoon, Chief Brown here. Yeah, so the hot team has been the boots on the street. They're out there Monday through Saturday, every morning. They get out there about 6:30 in the morning, and they do coordinate with multiple agencies throughout the day. Having a few meetings in the back of the room before we got up here, I really feel that fire is very good at the response side of things, but we're not great at the long-term problem-solving side of things. And that's where we'd love to see some more partners come in with us, and when we do respond, be able to take care of issues right there. We're still throwing problems to other agencies, and we may or may not hear back, and it may or may not be timely. So police and fire are out there daily in a pretty timely manner, but we have a lot of barriers that we're limited by as well. So.
Let's see. Couple things. It's tough to fight against anecdotes, and that's a lot of what I encounter. I got an email a couple days ago from an individual who said, I've had it, I've had enough. I think it went to probably a lot of you too. This is unacceptable. We've been complaining about unruly behavior for unhoused for this, and I looked up the incident, and we had police officers there in exactly 2 minutes. They were there, and they made an arrest, and they took an enforcement. But I'll probably hear about that for a couple months. So statistically, we haven't seen that. You mentioned a small group of individuals, which Brad and I probably know every single one by name, and it's from walking up and down Division and Monroe Center. And the problem, to Mr. Kettle's point, is in the unhoused community, there is a much higher percentage of individuals suffering mental health issues. And because we are not best suited to address those, these probably 6 or 8 individuals that we're like friends with on a regular basis, we go, and they're usually the ones that are generating all the 911 calls, but we don't quite have the tools because it's disruptive behavior. It can be annoying, but really what they need is treatment. And when we can get them treatment, we get them to the treatment. We have a great relationship with these individuals, but the next day, it's like we started all over, and they're in the same place and the same thing, and it's just over and over and over. And I know Brad made it his personal goal when he started out, when he was named chief. He's like, because there were 2 individuals that we both see every single day. He said, I'm going to get them housing. And it's been, 2 weeks later now? And it's not, maybe if it was a different set of laws as far as involuntary commitments of individuals in a mental health treatment, we would have them in placement or some other magic wand that we don't have. But we're trying. It is a small group of individuals that cause 90% of our issues. It would help if we had, obviously, as we continue to staff up on the police department side, the hot team's adding some firefighters. So the residents, the visitors here, they like to see the men and women in uniform, the ambassadors, the private security. It gives everybody a safer feeling. And we do get compliance. 99% of the time we get compliance. You got to stop this disruptive behavior, and they're good with it. So I've seen a ton of progress in just a year. I've been here, and I think we'll still keep making progress. But I will say, as I've said many times, the police, the fire department, we're not the only answer. Really, the city, as you guys have pointed out today, we only control what the city controls. There's so much more to this. Thanks for that. That was a little bit of a rant.
I think I would also add, Commissioner Isasi, on the themes of things we control versus influence. Part of the conversations we've had are sort of what are the other alternatives? So we talked about enforcement. Obviously, crimes are crimes. A lot of the things that we're hearing about are misdemeanor level crimes, so they generally are not going to lead to, arrest and taking someone away right in that moment. Frequently, it's a citation. So that's sort of, and what does that do? What does that create a different pathway of access to conversation to have someone change their behavior? Because there's sort of there's just another opportunity to talk about what is and isn't okay, possibly. But that's what misdemeanor crime enforcement does for you, and it has to also be prioritized against all the other 911 calls. So there's that body of work. We have also heard, and I think this is another education and transparency, some folks are not willing to or don't always live out all pieces of their lives when they're unhoused in either the shelters or the day center places that are available, either because they're operating under old information about the rules of a particular shelter or facility, and that's something we have tried to undertake with all of our outreach folks to give updated information about facilities that have more tolerance for certain behaviors. They have updated and remodeled their facilities to have more private spaces and things like that. But there are still rules in a lot of places. There are rules that are tied to federal funding and other things that, that you can't do, some behaviors that you can't do inside that sometimes happen outside now. And so do we have more opportunity to continue to influence and have those conversations about where certain activities can happen?
I just have a follow-up, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Ms. Behrens. I think this probably gets to a tactical question from what we discussed today in the budget presentation. So this is year 3 that we've done the dollars for the storage via Mel Trotter. And so one of my questions was going to be, what is that utilization? Because I think that's a regular piece that we often get, stacking of lots of different personal items, certainly. So we've tried to create this solution. Are people utilizing that? Do we need more of it? Is there also, I've heard the theme is transparency or awareness, right? I mean, sometimes my mom calls me and asks me things and I'm like, that was clearly on the city website. But if it's easier, sorry, Mom, if it's easier to find some other way, we usually go to a trusted source versus like maybe who has the real information. So we're combating that. And so do we need to rethink partners on that? Do we need more? Do we need to have more collaboration to that point? I heard you say that a little bit, Mayor. Different people go to different entities. We all have choices about, where we like to go. Do we need to do that to encourage usage? So that's a little bit more tactical.
Sure, and I can talk about this a little bit, and it might be a place where it's a yes and answer to what you just asked. But first, yes, we are continuing to support the private item storage in partnership with Mel Trotter. That is in the manager's preliminary budget for fiscal year 24 as well. It is used. It is heavily utilized. We do have circumstances where folks are told there isn't space in the bins. We've worked on sort of the life cycle of a bin, if you will. So making sure that bins aren't actually been abandoned, that if that's the case, things are moved out to free up space. So we are working to make sure that there are bins available, but they are heavily utilized. So it might be the yes and. They are available, but we maybe more different locations might be something we could dig further into. We do also, HOT is very aware of the bins, helps people connect up with the bins, and this daily cleaning that we've been doing is another opportunity to make sure people know there are safe and secure places to store your items. And so each time we're doing that sort of outreach and then coming along and cleaning up, we're encouraging folks to use those instead of porting things with them everywhere they go, just for safety and security.
Mr. Chair, I wonder if we could ask the gentleman from 180 to come up and maybe explain to us what the barriers are for them.
Sure.
And why they're not doing more.
All ad-lib. Thanks very much to our partner.
Good afternoon, Bill Ward, Network 180. Great question. think the biggest challenge that we face with this certain population is they have to want to have help. And so one of the things that the social workers are doing is trying to build that rapport with them. To answer to your second question about the county's ability to serve these individuals. So as the mental health provider for the county, as soon as we qualify these individuals, they will go on our Medicaid rolls. So then we can deliver all the services that we have available. But the biggest piece is we need them to come in. And we need them to say, I want help. Right. So as soon as we can get them to have that relationship, then we can start the therapy and the supports that they need.
Why do you need their permission?
Because first, one, it's, I don't even know how to answer that question, but if, as part of the therapy process, as part of getting better, you have to be willing to put in the effort. And so if you don't want to get help for your alcoholism, you're going to go buy alcohol. You're going to buy drugs. So it really is a trust between the treatment team and the individual.
Well, I'm a parent of someone, and I can tell you that I understand what you're saying, but I'm in a position to say, or to express myself in a way that says that almost sounds like a cop-out. I get it. I know. I can't get my kid to take medication. I get all that. But to keep a person who's suffering like that on the street, to me, that's inhumane. I think we're a much better community than that. So I just, if it's money, if it's state law, whatever it is that's prohibiting you, let us know. And
So there are very specific crisis events where we can involuntary confine someone. So that crisis center that the mayor talked about is limited to 72 hours. So we cannot have an individual in there more than 72 hours. That's not our goal. Our goal is to get that individual out of there in 8 hours, because it's really just to address that crisis event so then we can get them to the road to recovery.
Thank you. So I guess for me, I continue to, again, I appreciate the comments everyone's made so far. And I'm looking at, we're going on a little over an hour here. What does it look like moving forward, and how we continue to, to work towards positive outcomes here. And excuse me. One of the things that keeps kind of being triggered in my mind as I look at, the packet and talking about what are the gaps that exist. And, as we only have so many tools in our toolbox as policymakers, but what are some ongoing gaps in policy that exist that might be preventing we can go around and clean up after the fact, but it's, prevention is always the best medicine. And so are there preventative steps that, and gaps in policy that exist that we probably need to take a better look at, right? And so I think I try to balance the, it's like our vital streets plan, right? Like, we're building roads for bicycles and for cars and for people, and that frustrates people at different points where, some people think roads are only for cars, and, people that ride bicycles get frustrated because, motorists don't respect them. And I feel like all of our public spaces kind of fall into that vein, right? Like, a sidewalk is built for everyone too, and if there's a person experiencing an accumulation of personal belongings in a sidewalk that is creating an obstacle from any pedestrian or any visitor to our community from enjoying that sidewalk, we got to figure out a path to be able to get that accumulated goods off the sidewalk and, not throw them away, but figure out how we get. We don't have any real teeth in a policy that says you can't accumulate things on a sidewalk, and the city can't just come and throw them away. Now, if I was a landlord and I had a mattress in my front yard, the city would provide me notice, and I would have to clean that up. But I don't think there's anything that exists in our policy to address, someone that's kind of in the ether, that's in that in-between space between they're not a property owner, they're not they're not a tenant, but they're blocking the general public's ability to be able to use that space safely and cleanly. And so I really think the city should look at how we potentially look at some sort of ordinance around that. And I know it's going to involve, I think proactively speaking, to Commissioner Sassi's point, we've done some of the things already to ensure that there might be places that things can go if someone chooses to do that. But maybe we need to create a more comprehensive policy about how we, again, I don't want to create policy just that's not the first tool in the toolbox. But if you don't have a policy in place, you don't have any mechanism to then, coax someone along, right? Like I'm confident that our friends in the police and fire departments don't like to, they use discretion every day. The first choice isn't to go down and say, is to arrest someone, but it's to say, hey, maybe we shouldn't do this because they have something to point to that says this is the reason you can't have, you can't be collecting, 700 pounds of personal effects that sit on the sidewalk day in and day out. And so I'm asking, and I guess challenging the administration to come up with a plan to maybe look at some other policy gaps that exist. And are there things we as the commission should consider for future consideration to address this in the short term? Again, there's a long-term plan in place, I think, in Grand Rapids to try to address these, but there are some short-term things I think we need to, we continue to hear complaints about daily. I think one of the other things I'd really like to see the administration consider is around an expansion of the panhandling ordinance. We did it during COVID to our public spaces, our public dining spaces and social districts. Again, not trying to ban it in the city, that's unconstitutional, but to say, during financial transactions, I think that is one of the complaints we hear most often is when you're trying to go in or out of a parking garage, when you're at an ATM, when you're trying to park at a parking meter, like those are moments when any individual is doing something that is sensitive in nature, and I think there should be a level of expectation that you should be able to do that free from harassment. And again, I don't think it's then being able to have that tool in the toolbox so that the police department and other folks tasked with administering those ordinances can say, don't do that. It creates an expectation. We're not trying to criminalize it, but it's to try to create pathways to say that this is no longer acceptable behavior in these certain circumstances. And so, I'm asking the city to consider trying to figure out what those policies could potentially look like and bring them back for some future discussion.
Can I add to that? I would like to hear options around that. And I would also like to get an update on what we can do to respond to some of the calls for trespass. And I see that, there's some work being done to look at what we can do to respond more quickly. That's one I hear pretty regularly, especially in office buildings that, are to a point where they are talking about needing to lock their doors, which if they're on the 9th floor and the main door is locked, we're just adding a lot of inconvenience. We've all heard stories of individuals going into offices and making threats. So that trespass piece, I think, is a big one that we've heard pretty consistently that we need to make sure that we're responding to, which potentially could turn into a serious situation. Looking at policy gaps, but also looking at even, as you said, city manager, funding, realigning some of our funding. I think the HOT team does great work at responding quickly. We have public safety. We have individuals from Network 180, which I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, Bill, since you've gotten here. Mental health workers can help with that, some of the tracking down of identification, helping get people enrolled if they haven't been enrolled in Medicaid or Medicare. But the missing piece is that piece of working with a nonprofit that can help get that individual who's unsheltered into housing. And I think so to me, that potentially is a gap on our HOT team that we need to really look closely at fixing. And again, if we just start in a targeted area and, learn from that experience, I'm open to doing that and talking to other partners who can work with us on that. Because I can't imagine how frustrating it is for our officers to respond or firefighters to respond. And you've been trying to find housing for somebody for 2 weeks. And so that's where I want to explore that a little bit more closely as a more immediate response. And then I had a third one, and then Chief, I also, and maybe City Manager, you can follow up on this. I've heard this consistently over the last year, that we know that there's a handful of individuals who tend to be the most challenging. It seems to me that we should be able to do a very targeted approach with those individuals and identify how we can help them get the support that they need. I know we've done this before with DICE. We have really good data. Your team does a great job. You've done some really great work with Vice over on Hartside to address some of the issues. You know, maybe we need to really think about that as well. Yeah, Commissioner, I'm not going to speak for you, but I know we've had conversations with District Court. Many people know, you know, who the individuals are that we really need to come up with a much more comprehensive and intensive plan to help. And so those are kind of the 4 things that I would like. Sorry, did I list 5, City Manager? That's okay. You're taking notes. Those are the ones. Those are the areas I would like us to explore, and for city staff to think through what are some options for us.
Okay. So I think that the piece on the trespassing, you know, is definitely one of those things that if I drill down, what are the opportunities there? We had a kind of a similar conversation with our Safe Task Force with the prosecutor around youth, and sort of, you know, something happens, they get released, they go and do the same thing again. And he's been looking at what are some prevention opportunities so that it's going to get people into a program or something that they might like to do. I think we're trying to determine what is the appropriate measures there. I would say the same thing. I've said before, I am not in favor of adding more laws on the books. I think we've got a brand new commission from when we last had this conversation, so I know we're talking about this in committee. But I'm particularly concerned. One, thank you, Chief, for giving that feedback around, I think there was an article recently, it was like, people are more afraid, sort of like what gets sort of anecdotally shared. And you shared a little bit that, Chief Winstrom. Thank you for using data to explain the response times. 2 minutes, if that's not the expectation, like we're never going to meet anybody's expectations. Like I'm just going to say it right now. So thank you for sharing that. That doesn't mean that it's not important, but that is a darn good response time. So what I'd be interested in is if we did something like that, can we take it not just through what it looks like for the police department, but what it looks like from the city attorney's office, through the prosecutors, you know, depending on what kind of crimes they are, right? I think we're talking here about one lane of public safety, and we need to understand how this plays out fully, and I don't think that we've done that. So I would only be supportive of understanding that and having the rest of that piece shared. So I don't fully agree with Commissioner O'Connor's comments, I would say, at this point.
Thank you, Ms. Chair, and for all the feedback. I would say that we can look into all the points that have been made and come back with some additional analysis on both gaps for service, for funding for the housing services, but also whatever it is that would give us better responses to complaints, whether it is for housing or whether it is for violation of current ordinances. What I hear is to be improved. And to Member Cameron's point earlier about opening the pocketbook, I want to use that. I got the mic now. Opening the pocketbook. So this morning's budget presentation did that. I mean, there is a clean community proposal with the refuse millage to increase cleaning services that would allow our Public Works Department to do that more frequently. The Parks Department's budget for their operations has increased, and there's no need to wait until July 1 to try to remedy some of these weekend issues. I expect to see some immediate response to some of the things that we've seen as soon as this weekend. So, but even if we do that, the point is we're not fixing the problem. Those are all downstream issues, and we're dealing with symptoms. And so I still think the bigger issue, and I know Mr. Ward spoke about some of the I guess legal challenges. Maybe the city attorney could help us, but I agree with the mayor in that if we're going to do anything, it has to be with the right supportive services. And particularly if, I could definitely see if there are financial transactions that are happening at ATMs, at wherever, people are exchanging, commerce, that we need to make sure people are not harassed when those things are happening. And, but also we need to make sure that people not being criminalized just for not having a place to go and not committing a crime. So I think those mental health, behavioral health services, I know we have it with Network 180. The HOT team is able to do some, firefighters are EMT trained certified, and you have some protection from law enforcement. But what we don't come with is, this is where you can go and stay for the next 36 hours. And by the way, we can get you somewhere tonight. What happens, you refer, you choose, you call, you wait on the call back, and that's what we need to improve. And I've asked for an improvement of that, and maybe it's ambitious, but I've asked for better outcomes with our partners by May 5th, and I'm sticking to that. Is that the date I said? I want to make sure it is, and I'm sticking to it, so that we have a better outcomes with that. And so in the May public safety meeting, hopefully we can report back on all these issues. In terms of the ordinance issues, what I'd like to do is look specifically at those financial transaction incidents and see what I've heard and what I've seen in other communities. Instead of doing this blanket application of law all across the city, there have been, if you look in other communities, areas where there's high traffic areas where it would make sense if you got a lot of people, and it's normally a heavy tourist area, that for both safety of individuals that are in the pedestrian right of way, whether they're sitting, walking, whatever, that you keep those areas clear. And I don't think that that's every street in the city, but perhaps we could look and see if particularly during special events where you have a lot of people moving up and down sidewalks, and where there could be people prohibiting that. It would be no difference in the current ordinance that we are having in place. You can't block the sidewalk, but doing it time specific. And I'm not saying that's a solution. I'd like to look into that. And so that's kind of a middle ground between nothing and implementation of, prohibitions all across the city. And I'm going to ask Ms. Behrens and our city attorney to see if we can do that. But and I don't mind the city. We knew that we had to do something, and that's the reason why we stepped up earlier under the pandemic. But we are not going to solve this just with city resources on this dais. And I think my conversation I had earlier with the county administrator, I'm going to ask him, appreciate the work Network 180 has been doing, Bill, and the other efforts, but I think this is a countywide issue, and I will be talking to the administrator to see if he can likewise help us.
Please.
We always talk about taking people off the street and housing them for 36 hours, and that's ridiculous. That's not how to fix this. So, my old buddy Ronald Reagan, as we all remember, decided mental health facilities were no good, and we have to get rid of them. He was right. They were no good. But instead of fixing the problem, he just eliminated them and poured thousands and thousands of people on our street who now have, really, we've got a whole new cultural class of people who are homeless, mentally ill, whatever. Maybe they'll turn into a political force. You never know. But in the meantime, reality says we need facilities where people can be housed and cared for on an ongoing basis in the most humane way. And anything short of that is we're just kidding ourselves. Not going to fix the problem. So again, I'm hoping you'll use your full weight as the city of Grand Rapids to press the county, press the state, and the federal government. And as always, you know me, I'm always willing to help. I'll do whatever you want me to do. But that's where it's at. That's the big picture thing, so. Thank
Well,
you.
very good. Well, it is now 2:59. We do have a scheduled employee review at 3 o'clock, so without any further discussion, unless there's anything pressing the city manager, deputy city manager want to say, we're going to.
Just one clarification. So I said to Resamaria, consistent with a already certified business district. It's what I'm considering.
All right. Thank you all for attending today, and we will adjourn the meeting here at 2:59. Thank you, everyone.